I want to take up in volume 12, March the 14th, 1920. The martyrdom of love surpasses in an almost infinite way all other martyrdoms together. Luisa said, "My state is even more painful. And while I was swimming in the immense sea of the privations of my sweet Jesus, of my life, of my all, I couldn't help lamenting and also speaking some nonsense." So I want to give you Psalm 73, verses 25 to 26. Jesus moved in her interior, which of course is Luke 17:21, the kingdom of God is within you, and 1 Corinthians 3:16, you are the temple of the living God and the Spirit of God dwells in you. Jesus said, "My daughter, you are the hardest martyrdom, the crudest pain of my heart. And every time I see you moan and petrified by the pain of my privation, my martyrdom becomes more bitter. And the spasm is such that I am forced to sigh, and moaning I say, 'O man, how much you have cost me. You formed my martyrdom to my humanity, which, taken by folly of love for you, took upon itself all your pains. And you continue to form the martyrdom of the one who, taken by love for me and for you, has offered herself as a victim for me and for your sake. So, my martyrdom is continuous. Even more, I feel it more vividly because it is the martyrdom of one who loves me. And the martyrdom of love surpasses in an almost infinite way all other martyrdoms together." So here we have Luisa's martyrdom of the heart compared to Jesus's martyrdom, and Jesus's martyrdom was due to his love for humanity and taking all of humanity's trials and pains and burdens upon himself. And he did it out of love for us. And now Luisa is doing the same thing out of love for Jesus and for us. And so since Jesus and Luisa are united together in the highest possible union in the divine will, of course he feels it. And he says that through Luisa, his own martyrdom continues. And he says that the martyrdom of love surpasses infinitely all other martyrdoms put together. One of the reasons for that is that it goes on and on and on, moment by moment, day by day. Whereas if someone someone's life is taken from them in martyrdom, then it lasts only a short time and it's all over. But this martyrdom is on a daily, hourly, minutely basis. Then, drawing his mouth close to the ear of my heart, I don't understand that expression, how the heart could have an ear, but never mind. He said, my daughter, only your Jesus can understand you and sympathize with you, because I feel your martyrdom within mine." And then he added, "Listen, my daughter, with the chastisement of war, man had humbled himself and come to his senses, other chastisements would not be necessary." Now, the whole idea is to bring down the pride of man and make him turn back to God. So that's Isaiah chapter 2, verses 7, 9, 11 and 17. That he would come to his senses as the prodigal son feeding among the pigs. Luke 15:17. And so I also want to give you Luke 8:35 to 36. So if the original chastisements had brought about the fruit that God actually wanted, which was that the pride of man would be brought low and man would turn to God with humility and repentance, then other chastisements wouldn't be necessary. But instead of humbling himself, man has raged even more. Therefore, in order to make man come to his senses, now notice this time there is insistence and force on the part of the Lord. In other words, human beings won't do it on their own. They won't accept the hint. They won't accept the invitation to come back to the Lord. So in order to make man come to his senses, more terrible chastisements than the war itself are actually needed. And this will happen, he says. So he's obviously thinking of World War II and all the wars since, and possibly World War III. Therefore, justice is forming voids. That is the space for justice to act. And therefore, Luisa feels that she's not part of it. Therefore, justice is forming voids. And if you knew what a void is being formed in my justice, with my not coming to you, you would tremble, he said. In fact, if I came to you, you would take my justice to yourself, and taking the pains upon yourself, you would fill the voids that man forms with sin. Have you not done this, he said, for many years? But now, the obstinacy of man, that's your Jeremiah 17:9-10. The obstinacy of man renders him unworthy of this great good. Now that obstinacy is stubborn hardness of heart, which absolutely rejects all the approaches of the Lord. But now the obstinacy of man renders him unworthy of this great good, and this is why I often deprive you of myself. In other words, he chooses justice, not the victim soul. And in seeing you martyred because of me, my pain is so great that I become delirious, I moan, I sigh, and I am forced to hide my moans from you, without even being able to pour them out on you so as not to give you even more pains. So Jesus is saying that he's not only keeping away from her in order to give justice its free vent on the human race, but he's also staying away from her out of pure love so as not to increase her love, her pains, sorry. So March the 19th, 1920. Life in the divine will means to live without one's own life, without personal reflections. But it is the life that embraces all lives together. Okay, so here we have another wonderful insight into what living in the divine will actually is. Now you're talking about someone whose will is locked into the divine will. Luisa said she was lamenting as usual, and she says to the Lord, "You have changed. Is it possible that not even suffering is there for me anymore?" Now he has just explained to her that when she's not suffering, that he is chastising, but she never accepts that. She feels she's not doing what she was made to do unless she's suffering. She said, "I alone am not worthy to suffer. It's true that I surpass everyone in badness, but you," she said, "have pity on me. Do not deny me at least the crumbs of the great suffering which you abundantly pour, you don't deny to anybody else. My love, how horrifying my state is," she said, "have pity on me, have pity." So Jesus moved in her interior, Luke 17:21, and he said, "My daughter, calm yourself, otherwise you hurt me." In other words, he's told her endlessly, but she's not accepting it. "Otherwise you hurt me and you open deeper gashes in my heart. Do you perhaps want to surpass me?" He has told her, and volume 12 isn't the only place he has told her. He has told her in earlier volumes as well, time out of number, that when he was he has told her that during the days of his incarnation, there were certain things that he wasn't allowed to do, that justice had to be given its freedom to work. He said, "Do you want to surpass me? I too would have wanted to enclose in me all the pains of creatures. My love towards creatures was so great that I would have wanted no pain to touch them anymore. But this I couldn't obtain. I had to submit to the wisdom and the justice of the Father. And this, of course, is what is being asked of Luisa as well, who, while allowing me to satisfy to a large extent for the pains of creatures, did not want satisfaction from me for all the pains. That's very interesting. In other words, divine wisdom and divine justice demanded that all of us would have to participate in the sufferings that came as a result of our own sins and the sins of others. We have to participate. We have to grow up. And this was for the decorum and the balance of divine justice. He said, my humanity would have wanted to suffer so much as to put an end to hell and to put an end to purgatory and to all scourges. But the divinity didn't want that. And justice said to my love, you wanted the right of love, and it was granted to you. Now I want the rights of justice as well, because all of the divine attributes are infinitely equal. So Jesus said, I resigned myself to the wisdom of my Father. John 14:31. I could give you many others as well. I saw this wisdom as just, but my moaning humanity felt the pain of it because of the pains that touched the creatures. Jesus suffered because they suffered, and he still tells Luisa that with the chastisements he also suffers as well. But he resigned himself. In hearing your laments, he said, for not suffering, I hear the echo of my laments, and I run to sustain your heart and to give you strength, knowing how hard this pain is. Know, however, that this is also the pain of your Jesus. And he has told her from volume 1 that he wants her as a perfect replica of himself. So if he went through it, he wants her to go through it in the measure that a creature can. And so Luisa said that she resigned herself for love of Jesus, also not to suffer. But the torment of her heart was even more bitter. The torment of her heart was even more bitter. And many things wandered through her mind, especially on what he had told her about the divine volition. I seemed not to see in me the effects of his word. Now, this is a very, very important point, because we are doing our acts in the divine will. We are reading and studying the texts. We are trying to live this wonderful mission. And yet I'm sure you can join Luisa in saying, I don't see in me the effects of this teaching. And so it can be a real problem, and it can be a temptation to give up as well. So again, Jesus comes back in the next section to tell us that the human life must give way to the divine. The divine has to take over. My daughter, Jesus said, when I asked you whether you would consent to want to live in my divine will, and you accepted, you said, I say yes, not with my will, but in yours, so that my yes may have all the power and the value of a yes of the divine volition. That yes still exists and will always exist, just as my will always exists. Therefore, your human life is ended. You signed up for this. Your human life has no more reason to live. You signed on the dotted line that you wanted the divine life. You can't have both. So your human will has no more reason to live. And this is why I told you that since all creatures are in my will, in the name of the whole human family, you can come to lay at the foot of my throne in a divine manner the thoughts of all in your mind, to bring me the glory of each thought, in your gaze, in your word, in your action, in the food you take, and even in your sleep. You can bring me those of all. So your life must embrace everything, because the divine will embraces everything. See, one of the signs by which you will know how far you've got into this living in the divine will, has your thoughts and has your prayers become universal. And don't you see, Jesus said, that when sometimes oppressed by the weight of my privation, something escapes you of what you do, and you do not unite all the human family together, I reprimand you, he says. And if you don't listen to me, afflicted, I say to you, if you don't want to follow me, I'll do it by myself. Life in my will means to live without one's own life. Now let me repeat that. Life in the divine will means to live without one's own, let's add the word human life. You've given up the human for the divine. It's to live without personal reflections. What's in it for me? Where am I in this? Where am I going? How is this benefiting me? Blah, blah, blah. All that has got to be deleted. But it is the life that embraces all lives together. Your only interest is in the glory of God and the salvation of souls. Very good discernment there, and we've had that a number of times now in recent messages. So March the 23rd, 1920, the soul wants hiddenness and Jesus wants her as light. So instead of saying the soul there, put Luisa. Luisa wants to be completely hidden, but the Lord has put her as a lamp on a lampstand, and she needs to be seen by the whole church because he's initiating a new era of divine holiness through her. So Luisa was saying to Jesus, I would like to hide myself to the point of disappearing from everyone, and so that everyone would forget about me as if I no longer existed on the earth. How heavy it is for me having to deal with people. I feel all the necessity of a profound silence. Well, the closer people get to God, the greater is the need for that profound silence. And Jesus, moving in her interior, said, you want to hide yourself, and I want you as a candelabra, a lamp on a lampstand, and it must give light. Now that's Matthew 5, 14 to 16, Matthew 13, 43. This lampstand, or a candelabra, I think he's thinking of the 7-branch candlestick before the Holy of Holies in the temple, the menorah. So this menorah will be lit by the reflections of my eternal light. So a priest used to light the 7 lamps in front of the Holy of Holies every day in the temple, representing the 7 is perfection, representing all the perfections of God. And he said, no, the lamp that you are, the candelabra, the menorah that you are, will be lit by the reflections of my eternal light, because everything, once you're in the divine will, everything comes from him. So if you want to hide, you do not hide yourself, you hide me, and you hide my light, and you hide my word. Now he's told us perfectly clearly in the gospel that we're not to hide the word, we're not to put it under a bushel. So that's Matthew 5:15, Mark 4:21, and Luke 11:33. So Luisa said that after this she continued to pray, and she found herself outside of herself together with Jesus, but she was small and he was great. And Jesus said, my daughter, stretch yourself so as to equal me. Now, how can a tiny speck of dust stretch itself to equal the divine? It can only be done in the divine will and through the divine will, with the power of the divine will, who can do anything because nothing is impossible with God. And Jesus placed his hands within mine. You see, the power is coming from him. And he repeated to me, stretch yourself, stretch yourself. So that means you want to do it. I tried and I felt like a spring, she said, such that if I wanted to stretch, I got longer. If not, I remain small. In other words, notice that she has to use her free will to agree. With the Lord, your free will is always free, even when you're completely committed to him and totally consecrated to his divine will. He gave you free will, he will never take it back. It's the opposite of that with people who get involved in the occult and Satanism. As soon as Satan gets a grip on a person's will, he enslaves them and they're no longer free to use their free will. So Luisa said, I easily stretched myself and I leaned my head upon Jesus' shoulders. So she started out very small like a little child and now she's tall like an adult. And he continued to keep his hands within mine. At the contact of his most holy hands, I was reminded of the wounds of Jesus, and I said to him, my love, you want me to equal you. Why don't you give me your pains? Give them to me and don't deny them to me. And Jesus looked at me and pressed me tightly to his heart, as if he wanted to tell me many things, but he disappeared instead, and Luisa came back to herself. So, if Jesus has given her that exercise about stretching, then as we go on in the messages, you're going to find out why. So April the 3rd, 1920. All the will of God in creating man was that he would do his will in everything in order to develop his life. So let's put that into simple English. God's will in creating man was that we would do his will, and that we would have his life in us. So Jesus said to Luisa, my daughter, all my will, or the only thing I ever wanted in creating man, was that he would do my will in everything. And as he would gradually continue to do this will of mine, I would come to complete my life in him in such a way that after repeated acts done in my will, forming my life in him, I would come to him. And finding him similar to me, the son of my life, finding the son of my life that he had formed in his own soul, would absorb him into me. And as they would be transformed together, these two sons would become one. I would bring him into the delights of heaven. Now, what Jesus has said here is the main topic of the entire Bible. Starting in Genesis, the only thing that God ever asked of man was that we would do his will. And it's summarized in Micah 6:8. This is what the Lord asked of you, only this, that you would act justly, that you would love tenderly, and that you would walk humbly with your God. He didn't ask much. But fallen human nature is such that the moment you put up a prohibition about something, it's the only thing we want. If you put up a no entry sign into a place, everybody wants to go in and find out why there's no entry. If you've done any babysitting and the mother has the foolishness to say, don't touch the biscuits before she goes out, then the only topic of the evening is biscuits. If I've been prohibited from doing something, then my rebellious, unredeemed will wants that. Don't eat the apple you found in Genesis chapter 3. What did Eve do? She found it very desirable. She gave herself all kinds of reasons and she rationalized the thing the Lord tells us not to do. And she decided, yeah, she'd have it, no matter what the consequences were. And so what God intended was that we would gradually enter more and more and more and more deeply into surrendering to his will. That we wouldn't just sort of do it on the outside. We wouldn't just resign. We would actually embrace it. I think it was Saint Therese of Lisieux who said to the Lord, I want what you want for me. So there's the human will at its best. I want what you want for me. And then as we would come deeper and deeper doing our acts in the divine will, then Jesus says that the sun of his life would be formed more and more in us, and he would come and dwell in us. We would become the place or the locus where he would reign on the earth. He would form his throne in us. Now, by the creature not doing my will, Jesus said, or if she does it now and then she doesn't, my will is halved by the human life, and the divine life cannot be completed in her. It is obscured by the human acts and does not receive abundant fruit to give a development that would be sufficient in order to form a life. Therefore, the soul is in continuous opposition to the purpose of her creation. But alas, how many there are who, by living a life of sin and of passions, form within themselves the diabolical life instead. Okay, so if doing God's will and entering more and more deeply and surrendering to the Lord and doing all our acts in the divine will forms the throne of Christ on earth, of course somebody indulging in sin and filth and surrendering more and more to this spiritual leprosy, of course they're forming the throne of Satan on the earth. Two entirely different kingdoms. Just a tiny little reflection on Jesus saying, earlier he said, when I would come and find the son of my life in him, I'd find him similar to me, he said, the son of my life, finding the son of my life in the soul, would absorb him into me. Well, he keeps on telling us that there's a whole universe inside of us, parallel to the universe outside of us. Look at some of your astronomy programs, and if you see two galaxies merging, they have an enormous amount of light separately in all the myriads of stars that they have. But when they actually merge, they emit tons of light and heat and energy. That's called life. Light, heat and energy is what we call life. They emit absolutely massive amounts of life. And so in these writings, Jesus is telling us that when we surrender finally to the divine will, and the divine will can absorb us into himself and we can possess God, that the amount of light and grace and life that will come out of us is only massive. So April the 15th, 1920, the cause of the pains of Jesus. Luisa said, I was lamenting to my sweet Jesus about my painful state, saying to him, tell me, my love, where are you? Which way did you go? So that I may follow you. Let me see the marks of your steps, so that step by step with certainty I may find you. Ah, Jesus, without you I can endure no more. For though you are far away, I send you my kisses. I kiss that hand which no longer embraces me. I kiss that mouth which no longer speaks to me. I kiss that face which I no longer see. I kiss those feet which no longer walk towards me, but turn their steps somewhere else. Ah, Jesus, how sad is my state, how cruel this is. Please end the waiting for me. So this is the bride looking for her beloved, and you'll find it in the Song of Songs, chapter 5, verse 6. And also, I want to give you 1 Peter 1, 8 to 9, where St. Peter tells the Christians in the early church that even though you don't see him, you love him. And without loving him, you'll even experience a joy so glorious that it's unbelievable. And so Jesus came, he moved in her interior where he is residing as in his own temple. And he said, "My daughter, calm yourself. For one who lives in my will, all points are sure ways in order to find me." In other words, you can find me anywhere. I am everywhere. That's Psalm 139. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your face? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I go to the depths of Sheol, you are there. If I find myself in darkness, darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day. So he said, at all points, and no matter what your experience is, whether it's darkness or light, cold or heat, whatever it is, sickness or health, you can find me. My will finds everything. Whatever way she might take, there's no fear that she won't find me. Ah, my daughter, I feel your painful state in my, we would say, my sacred heart. I find the current of pain that passed between me and my mother being repeated. That is, between Luisa and him. Because after all, Blessed Mother lived in the divine will and lived at the height of the divine will, the summit, and therefore the current of connection between Jesus and herself is beyond our ability to understand. So he said, the pain that passed between them, that he can feel it coming through Luisa as well. She was crucified because of my pains, he said. I was crucified because of hers. But what was the cause of all this, he said? It was the love of souls. For love of them, my dear mother bore all my pains and even my death. And I, for love of souls, bore all her pains, to the point of depriving her of me. Oh, how much it cost my love and her maternal love to deprive my inseparable mother of me. But the love of souls triumphed over everything. Now, he's given Luisa a very important way of surviving the deprivation, and that is that love of souls must triumph. And it must triumph over everything, her pain, her longing, her need, her this, her that, or the other. And therefore she must be ready to put up with anything for the sake of saving souls. And he gives her our Blessed Mother as her model, and Luisa loved being close to our Blessed Mother and following her and working with her as much as possible. So then he comes to Luisa. Now, your state of victim to which you submitted yourself, you go back to volume 1, where she willingly offered herself to the Lord as a victim soul to intercede and save as many souls as possible and to make reparation for the church and the world. And he said, the reason why you did it was love of souls. And for love of them, you accepted all the pains that have unfolded in your life. That's going back the last 12 volumes. The cause of all of this has been souls. And the sad times that are coming, that's obviously in World War II and III and everything in between. He said, because of which my divine justice prevents me from being with you in a familiar way, in order to let more favourable times flow rather than stormy, and keep you on the earth. So 2 Corinthians 5, 1-10. Everything is because of souls. So this is her big motive now for accepting the deprivation, which she says she has no suffering, but she has the deprivation, which is the deepest suffering. If she offers that in union with Blessed Mother's deprivation and Jesus' deprivation, because after all he experienced it on the cross as well, to gain his infinite merits, and in the divine will, it will have an absolutely super massive response in terms of saving souls. So he said the cause has been souls, and the sad times that are coming, because of which the divine justice prevents me from being more familiar with you, in order to let more favourable times flow, rather than stormy, and keep you upon the earth. It's because of souls. If it were not for love of them, your exile would be ended. In other words, Jesus would have long since taken her to heaven. And you would not have the pain of seeing yourself without me, nor would I have the pain of seeing you so tormented because of my privation. Therefore have patience, and let it be that also in you the love of souls may triumph to the end. And so he gives her the motivation now, so that we're dealing with the heroic love of the neighbour, that you would suffer anything. There's no limit to the price that you would suffer in order to save them. Now her love is like Jesus' love. When you look at John 15:9, Jesus says, as the Father has loved me, so I love you. Now the Father loved Jesus infinitely, absolutely, unconditionally, eternally, knowing everything about his Son. And Jesus said, that's the way I love you. That's absolutely, eternally, unconditionally, knowing everything about you. And he said, and that's the way you are to love one another. So this absolute, eternal, unconditional love, knowing everything about the other. Now the thing we know about the souls we're trying to save is their sin and their degradation and their lack of wisdom and lack of life and blah, 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 and the fact that they're heading straight for hell if nobody turns them back. But knowing all that you would pay any price to save them. Now you've got heroism in love. So May the 1st, 1920, the sanctity of one who lives in the divine will is the continuous glory be. And one who lives up high in the divine will must bear the pains of those who are living down below in their own will. So Luisa continues, my misery makes itself felt more. And in my interior I was saying, my Jesus, what life is mine? And he, without giving me any time, immediately answered, my daughter, for one who lives in my will, her sanctity has only one point. It is the continuous glory be to the Father, followed by, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. So here we've just dealt with the fact that you will suffer anything to save souls, but the other side of the coin is that you live entirely for the glory of God. So you're actually living the life of heaven on earth. There's nothing which does not give glory to God. Complete in everything, always stable, always the same, always queen, without ever changing. So if you live in the divine will, there's nothing that won't give glory to God. If you're in the divine will, you will be giving glory to God. And therefore your acts will be complete in everything. You will be stable in your relationship with God. You'll always be the same. You'll always be the queen. You'll be on top without ever changing. So this wonderful stability is there. And Jesus says that this sanctity in the divine will is not subject to setbacks and to losses. It will always reign. And so its foundation is the glory be, its prerogative as it was in the beginning. So Romans 5:17. But Luisa continued to lament about his privations and also the withdrawal of suffering. And Jesus came out from within her interior, and leaning his head on her shoulder, all afflicted, he spoke to her. And he speaks to her about the greatness of the call in the divine will. My daughter, he said, One who lives in my will lives up high. Now that's the position of the eagle. And there are a number of texts in the Bible speaking about the greatness of the eagle. And one of them is in Proverbs chapter 30. And it says, there are 3 things I don't understand. 4 indeed I don't understand. 4 indeed I don't grasp. And it is the way of the eagle in the sky is the first one. And that's the mystery of our high calling in God. The second one is the way of the snake over the rock. And that's the mystery of the enmity between Satan and Christ. Christ is the rock of our salvation. The third one is the way of the ship in mid-ocean. And that's the mystery of the church going through the waters of history. The mystery of its survival. And the fourth one is the way of a man with a girl. And that's the mystery of the love between Christ and every single soul. It's a bridal mystery. It's a spiritual marriage mystery. How he loves each soul as if nobody else existed. So for one who is living in the divine will, they must live up high in that great mystery of the eagle who lives at the tops of the mountains and keeps away from all the fuss and the nonsense down on ground level. But the eagle has extraordinary sight, and from a very great height it can actually see fish in the ocean and make an absolutely death-defying dive into the ocean to get the fish, and it comes up right back to where it arrived from, right at the top of the mountain. When the eagle decides that it wants to go places, it doesn't use its own energy. Instead of that, it waits for the thermals. And depending on the direction the wind is going, it will fly on the wings of the wind and not use its own energy at all, or very little of it. And so you look up and you see it soaring in the heavens. And that's because it's sitting on the thermals in a most wonderful way. And it's a very wonderful image of us completely surrendered to the Lord and allowing him to guide us and to do everything in us, with us, and through us. So my daughter, one who lives in my will lives up high. And the one who lives up high can look down below, because you see, other birds are at a much, much lower level than the eagle. And he can look with more clarity because the eagle has very wonderful eyesight. And must take part in the decisions, in the afflictions, and in everything that befits the people who live up high. So if that is your calling, you have got to do everything that eagles are supposed to do. You've got to carry out their office. Don't you see this in the world, he said. Sometimes father and mother, and sometimes also an elder child, is capable of taking part in decisions and in the sorrows of the parents. While they are under the nightmare of sorrowful pains, uncertainties, intrigues and losses, the other children know nothing about it, and rather they let them go and play and continue the course of ordinary family life, not wanting to embitter their tender lives without a useful purpose for them and for the parents. It's a very simple, wonderful image you're given, that the parents and sometimes the eldest child will form a group that will make all the decisions, and the younger ones are allowed to have their unsullied, untouched childhoods in a very wonderful way. And so the Lord gets people living in the divine will to understand the needs of souls and to take decisions about making reparation for them and substituting for them and suffering for them and all the rest of it. But these souls go gaily on and they don't realise anybody's interested in them. They will be utterly amazed and shocked when they arrive in heaven and discover, I am here because of somebody else. Because somebody else paid a great price. That's like saying that a child gets some big opportunity for education because an uncle or an aunt or somebody has actually paid the fees. The parents couldn't pay it, so somebody else pays the fees. Somebody who isn't as closely related as the immediate family. And Jesus said the same thing happens in the order of grace. One who is little and still growing lives down below. So when you're dealing with the divine will, there are 3 levels that we need to remember. The lowest level is where the world is at, where people are, they may have a religion, but they don't really have faith. Not real faith in a personal relationship with God. Many of them don't really bother about religion, and they're worldly and they're getting on with sort of minding themselves and their own interests and so on. And they're living down below in their own will. And therefore, there will always be purges necessary for them. And there will always have to be the necessary means in order to make them grow in sanctity. So St. John of the Cross tells us that God will use the ordinary tribulations of every day to get them to grow. It would be as if one wanted to talk about business, intrigues, pains to the little ones in the family. They would be stunned without understanding anything. But one who lives in my will, living high up, must bear the pains of those who live down below. See, there's the position that Luisa is in, suffering for people she doesn't know. The one who lives up high must see their dangers, must help them, and take such serious decisions as to make one tremble, while they remain tranquil and even unaware. So Jesus made all these decisions for us because he was our elder brother. And now, at the beginning of the new era of the new holiness, we have Luisa as an elder sister. The ones who will take decisions for the little ones. Therefore, calm yourself, he said, and in my will, we, that is together, will live life in common. You in me and I in you, as John 14, 20 to 21. And together with me, you will take part in the pains of the human family. So Luisa, the elder sister, takes part with Jesus, the elder brother, in saving the little ones. You will watch over the great storms which will arise again. The great storms are the wars and the conflicts and all the rest of it. And just as the apostles called upon Jesus to calm the storms, so souls, without even realizing it, will be relying on Luisa to pray them through the storms. And while they play in the midst of danger, you, together with me, will cry over their misfortune. So here you've got the great responsibility that the ones who live up high take for the ones who are living down below, who are not even aware of the danger that they're in. So let's take May the 15th, 1920. The divine will forms the complete crucifixion of the soul. This is the bit about divine will that people find difficult. Luisa was lamenting to Jesus, "Where are your promises?" She said, "No more cross, no more likeness to you. Everything has vanished and there's nothing left for me to cry over except my sorrowful end." So I want to give you Psalm 73, verses 25 to 26. So Jesus said to her, "My daughter, my crucifixion was complete." That means nothing left out. And do you know why? Because it was done in the eternal will of my Father. In this will, the cross became so long and so wide as to embrace all centuries and penetrate into every heart, past, present, and future, in such a way that I remained crucified in the heart of each person. There's something we really need to look at, and that is that the crucifixion isn't just something that happened in Jerusalem. It's happening, as we know, in the mystery of the Holy Eucharist all the time. Jesus has explained that endlessly to us. But it's also happening in the mystery of each life, in every heart. This divine will put nails through all of my interior, into my desires, into my affections, into my heartbeats. I can say that I did not have a life of my own, but the life of the eternal will, which enclosed all creatures in me, and which wanted me to answer for everything. So there's the one living up high, answering for the ones living down below, not even understanding the dangers they're in. My crucifixion could never have been complete or so extended as to embrace all if the eternal volition had not been the actor. Now, we've dealt with this before, that if the divine will had not actually done this interior passion in Jesus, no way could human beings give him enough suffering to actually save us. I want that in you also the crucifixion will be complete and extended to all. So she's to be an image of him. This is the reason for the continuous call into my will. It's the reason for the spurs to bring the whole human family before the Supreme Majesty, and to emit in the name of all the acts which they don't do. The oblivion of yourself, the lack of self-reflections, are nothing other than the nails which my divine will has put into you. My will does not know how to do incomplete and small things. And forming a circle around the soul, the divine will wants the soul within itself. So I want to give you Philippians 1:6, that the Lord will complete the work he begins in us. So my will wants the soul within itself, and extending her within the whole sphere of the divine volition, it places on her the seal of its completion. There's your Philippians 1:6. My will empties the interior of the creature of all that is human. That's the bit where initially we find it rather difficult. And my will places in the soul all that is divine. So just looking at that sentence alone, you'll know where you're at in this journey. And in order to be more sure, the divine will keeps sealing all of the soul's interior with as many nails for as many human acts as can have life in the creature, substituting them with as many divine acts. In this way, it forms in her the true crucifixion, not for a time, but for her entire life. And in case you really balk at that, I want to give you Hebrews 12:2. That is the same for us as it was with Jesus, that for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. And for the joy of living in the divine will and being the throne of God on earth and letting him do what he wants to do, let us endure whatever comes, for love of him and for love of souls. I want to stop there.